Welcome to Southern Cross Resistance. I am your host, Chris Leeson. It is my honour today to introduce our next guest, former Labor leader and host of Mark Latham's Outsiders. I'd love to. It's my pleasure to introduce Mark Latham. How are we doing today, sir?
Yeah, really well. Thanks, Chris. Good to be with you.
Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to get started straight away and ask you, what was your shift from the Labor Party to more of a conservative sort of platform? Was it due to the left-leaning way the politics have been lately, or was it other reasons?
Oh, well, I've never been a conservative, and I wouldn't regard myself as a conservative today. But, since I left the Parliament 13 years ago, politics has fundamentally changed. Back then, the budget was massively in surplus. There was no political correctness. There was no identity politics. There was no march of cultural Marxism through our institutions.
Yep.
And the left still talked a bit about poverty as its main social justice priority, as opposed to race, gender and sexuality. So I think it's fair to say in a little over a decade, Australian politics is unrecognisable from where it was the time of the 2004 election. And I always say to people that the things that I talk about, if I stood up and made a speech about these issues and articulated my views, say in the mid-80s in the Hawke government, it would be regarded as unexceptional. Mm-hmm. So, I think there's a Labor tradition there that's been lost. Labor has become a light green party and the Liberals have become Labor light. So the whole spectrum has altered in the past decade, and I suppose where I stand now is a reflection of that.
Well, for me personally, as I said in my emails to you, I was very left-leaning, like 5-10 years ago, and it just seems, as you said, this political correctness where it's just almost, no matter what you say, you're either a Nazi or, you get labelled some BS term where it doesn't necessarily reflect your views.
No, in the old Soviet Union, the left tried to control people through economic policy, and now they're trying to control people through language control, controlling feelings and behaviour, focus on identity instead of individuality and real genuine need. Yep. So, it's a more insidious type of social control because they dress sort of like a Trojan horse approach. The left have got a lot smarter since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And take, for instance, the debate about domestic violence. Who's going to argue against domestic violence prevention? Mm-hmm. But it's use Trojan horse style to try and control our language. I mean, there's a ridiculous notion that if you stare at a woman, that's a form of violence. Tell a joke, 3 blondes walk into a bar, that's a form of domestic violence. Risque gifts are said to be a form of violence. I mean, our whole common sense definition of words is being rewritten, and it's all part of political correctness to try and control who we are, how we speak and what we think.
It's getting so ridiculous that I really don't know what to say to it anymore. Like, as I said, it's cultural Marxism. Instead of the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, it's just now straight guys, any sort of minority. And if you agree with anything they have to say, and suddenly, again, you're labelled some sort of thing that you're really not. But again, recently, and a form of this is what I found. A news article which was over in Utah. They've set up what they call a cry space, a cry closet for people, for university kids who, I don't know if you've seen this article or not, and it's filled with stuffed animals and stuff. It's almost like a safe space on campus. What's happening to campuses, not alone with America, but in the West altogether?
Well, they teach fragility now. They teach snowflake culture instead of resilience. The Australian way has always been resilience. I mean, you can sit there in your safe space with your stuffed toy as a 21-year-old at a university, but I'm afraid when you get into the real world and you've got to compete for jobs, or if you run a business or you're involved in other community-based activities, the world can be a lot tougher than the stuffed toy. So this really is a retreat to pretending that they're being nice to people by pandering to most fragile emotions, but there's also a form of segregation involved. Safe spaces, one for Indigenous, one for transgender, one for female, one for different racial groups. It's a segregating society. And, I grew up in a political environment where we all thought apartheid was bad in the old South Africa, and indeed it was evil. Mm-hmm. So why are we segregating Australians? According to philosophy, where people of only a certain gender, sexual race can go into a university space, or the New South Wales got a separate waiting room for Indigenous. A lot of this implies where the left was trying to take. How do you have Indigenous reconciliation if in a waiting room or a university, Indigenous people can't talk to non-Indigenous, can't get to know each other, they can't build trust and social capital? The whole point of reconciliation is for white and black people to know each other. Well, that can't happen if we're a segregated society with a separate waiting rooms in hospitals and university safe spaces.
Well, with the rise of political correctness, I've also noticed the rise of what it's being termed as was it dark web? Hang on a second. I've got it written down here. The political dark web or something like that, with Jordan Peterson and stuff like that. Do you think that's the best way to counteract, say, political correctness?
Well, I don't know much about the dark web. I do know about the work of Jordan Peterson.
Intellectual dark web is what that's what I was trying to think of. It's pretty much called the intellectual dark web, and Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, and a few others who were speaking up against politically correct. But continue, sorry.
Well, yeah, anyone who can find a voice, and particularly in alternative media, has got an important role to play. But I think the resistance against political correctness and identity politics is kind of an underground movement. But you've got a lot of people who hate this stuff, and their approach is, look, if I can get my kids into a school which is still okay, if I can avoid this stuff at work, or I can just turn a blind eye in the ridiculous unconscious bias training that I've got to do, or some sort of ridiculous diversity course, and I just get about my life in the media that I want, and people are flooding away from the mainstream media. So I just get along with a normal life, and I don't have to encounter this stuff too much, then that's pretty good. And that makes it very much like an underground movement. And what is in the United States is that if conservative or right parties, traditional right-wing parties don't fight this stuff, then you end up with someone like Trump who will fight it on behalf of the underground, and those people will rise up and use their vote to overturn the existing political order. So, there's always hope in a democracy, and there's always hope when people in large numbers are resisting this stuff at underground level.
I noticed you mentioned before about the apartheid in South Africa, and recently it's coming out in the news about what's happening to the white farmers down there. What's your opinion on that and what's happening over there?
Well, really, it's part of a pattern of revenge. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the human rights agenda, I sort of remember this from the 80s and 90s, our feeling was that if you give minority or oppressed groups human rights, then that's part of equal opportunity. Those rights will be used in a responsible way. But unfortunately, there's a pattern now of groups that and leadership who've said, look, we were oppressed in the past, we've got our human rights now, we're going to use that for the purpose of revenge. We're going to wipe out the people who oppressed us. Now, what's happening in South Africa is not what Nelson Mandela would have wanted. The white people are being shot at, farmers run off their land simply because of their skin colour. I thought Mandela was about harmony and equal opportunity in that country. And so too, you find a lot of radical left-wing feminists are all about revenge. It's not about actually helping women in the suburbs and regions. It's this ridiculous notion of white male privilege, the patriarchy. We're going to rub these blokes out. Stale, pale male. We've got to get wiped out of the workforce. This is the sort of revengeful rhetoric they've got. And also in the recent plebiscite about same-sex marriage, there were parts of the militant gay left community who were in that to basically openly saying, look, we're here to hurt the churches, we're here to damage Christianity, we're taking revenge on the people who held us back because they were gay. So, I think it's just a bad mistake for the left to open up these revenge campaigns on skin colour, gender or sexuality because, the traditional sensible left of centre approach was to say None of those things matter. We're going to look through and ignore skin colour in judging someone's work ethic and character. Same with gender and sexuality. You know, the whole Martin Luther King thing was judge people according to their character, not their skin colour. And unfortunately, in seeking revenge, the left have put these issues now at the centre of public debate and open up a level of hostility and antagonism in society that's incredibly damaging to the things they used to talk about.
I don't see how this doesn't just create exactly what they're saying we are. The sort of backlash on, you know, calling people names and all that, it's just going to cause exactly what they say they're fighting.
Well, it's appalling. You know, one of the manifestations of this is anti-white racism. Who would have thought people are being denigrated because of their white skin colour? And this is right at the mainstream. You know, I've got a court case of a guy called Osman Faruqi who's been hired by the national broadcaster. You're paying for it, I'm paying for it. And he is an anti-white racist. He's openly said he goes on TV panels to humiliate white people. He's openly said that, you know, ridiculous thing to say, that sunscreen is proof that white people belong in Australia. I mean, what sort of madness is taking hold of the ABC to employ someone who wants to denigrate white people simply because they're white? And he's attacked, and the thing that's got me in court with him, he's attacked members of his own political party, the Greens, because they were white senators who were rubbed out of the upper house. So, you know, there is a madness that's out there in the public arena. Anti-white racism is the worst manifestation of it, and the left really are fouling their own nest. If they think for a single moment that putting skin colour at the centre of public debate is a smart thing to do, then these people are certifiable lunatics.
Well, it's just like Clementine Ford. There's a petition going around at the moment to have a, because she's making a speech at the, where is it, Lifeline.
Yeah.
She had a hashtag of kill all men. I mean, in a public relations setting, that doesn't really look good for them, does it?
No, it's terrible. And she said in child support disputes, men should kill themselves. Now, why Lifeline have her at a conference just beggars belief. Today, Malcolm Turnbull's announced government money for Lifeline, which in part will fund Clementine Ford's hateful anti-male agenda. I mean, she is someone who has said in the context of child support disputes, men should kill themselves. To have her at Lifeline is just nuts. But that's where these organisations have gone. They're tolerating the worst forms of intolerance and fouling their own nest. And for Lifeline, it's a disaster. Why would any man in the country donate and help Lifeline if they're going to promote someone like Clementine Ford?
I just don't understand it. And to me, it's just, they say toxic masculinity. I just think this is a toxic ideology that's sort of set in, and it's the whole idea of victim mentality.
Yeah, it is, and it's all about hatred and revenge. And if anyone thinks Ford is sort of the answer to a good, harmonious society, well, you'd have to think again.
Well, the one thing that's really been boggling my brain is a way to sort of bring people back together. And you saw it just before the election, but I think it got emphasised during the 2016 election. What exactly can we do to sort of bridge the gap between the left and the right at the moment? Because all I can see is it leading to even worse scenarios. Yeah,
no, it is. And what we should be doing is abolishing safe spaces, abolishing forms of segregation, not talking or putting race, gender and sexuality at the centre of how we judge people, at the centre of public. You know, the Australian tradition was always free speech, meritocracy and a fair go. Just judge people on their individual merits.
Yeah.
And women, you can take the case of women have made amazing advances in Australia in the last 20 or 30 years. That we've now got more female than male lawyers and GP doctors, vets, teachers, office managers, public servants in Australia. You don't need people saying kill all men or men should suicide or be part of this abuse of the rights opportunities. So, you know, we need to get back to the Australian tradition. Free speech, sure. Bit of larrikin humour, yes. Judge people on merit and build a society of the fair go, which means equal opportunity.
It just seems to me that, again, you said it perfectly. It's almost about revenge. It's like, my life sucks, so who do I blame? Like, I started this podcast as a bit of fun, talk to mates about maybe a couple of conspiracy theories here and there, but it almost sort of leads down the same way. Feminism almost leads down the same way as some conspiracy theorists, where they go and blame Jewish people for all the bad things in the world. Well, these people are blaming all white men for the problems in the world. The similarities between the two are uncanny, and it's one of the reasons I sort of changed the whole idea behind this podcast to focus more on a political thing. So, sorry, I don't want to get on a tangent, but
no, it's central to what's happening, because if women are making the sort of advances that I've mentioned earlier on, another statistic, 60% of our university graduates are female each year in Australia, which is obviously the basis of further workforce and professional success.
Yeah.
So women are making all those advances. What do feminists do? And there's certainly an industry, a left feminist industry, where they can talk at conferences and write for Fairfax and be employed at the ABC. What do? So they invent the false notion of white male privilege. They invent the false notion of the patriarchy. They invent a whole bunch of fraudulent Trojan horse-type campaigns, or the way they've campaigned on domestic violence, the way they've campaigned on sexual harassment with the Me Too movement, and it keeps them in a job. And in their bubble, with their self-reinforcing rhetoric, they've got a bunch of deluded people who follow them, but it's their false prophets. What they're saying doesn't match actually what's happening in society.
They're more, if the facts don't fit into what they're saying, then it's like, okay, then, you're a liar. They almost come up with their own terms of fake news in a sense. But
they find if the world doesn't match their point of view, they just present it as a different thing to what reality indicates. It's a sad mental state. And, we talk about their hatred of Donald Trump derangement syndrome. People are deranged across the board.
Well, I've been supporting Trump since the 2016 elections. I think the only time that I've ever came out against him was just recently with the bombing of Syria. I don't see how that really helps anything. If anything, it just adds more tension between Russia and America. But what's your thoughts on what's happening over in Syria before we wrap up?
Well, my view is that the Middle East is just a quagmire. It's from a sectarian hatred or religious division, and any occupying force, as we saw with the invasion of Iraq, it just builds resistance to the foreign occupier and makes the problem of terrorism and violence even worse. So unfortunately, intervening in the Middle East very rarely gets a positive result.
Yeah. Well, I think if it's all right, we'll probably wrap up there. But where can people find you if they want to hear more from Mark Latham?
Yeah, probably the best forum I'm working on now is my Facebook page, Mark Latham's Outsiders Facebook. So that's got about 65,000 followers, and we're building it up week by week and going really well. So that's where you'll see a lot of my content. Also, I ordered your book, but I was going to have it here and show it off, but it hasn't come in the mail yet. But thanks for buying a copy. Yeah, Conversations in the Kitchen, it's only $35. Get one for your mother, Mother's Day gift. What inspired you to write something like that? Like, with what you talk about, it's almost like, oh, by the way, I'm doing this over here. So what sort of inspired you to do a cookbook? Oh, well, when I left Parliament, I had a necessity. I had to cook for my wife and kids, and did a bit of research. And a TV show on James 2 years ago. It's opened the show by saying, what have you done this afternoon? I said, I've cooked up this particular dish for the kids, and I'm rolling out all these exotic recipes that I managed to master. And we found after a while that people watching the show were about the recipes, the political solutions to the problems of the world. Yeah. And then we put out the challenge, if the publisher out there that wants to publish all these recipes, please do so. And New Holland answered the call, and the cookbook's out there. But the serious message is that, dads can cook. It's a great way to relate to your kids, spark up conversations in the kitchen. And back in the day, say in the 70s when I was growing up, the dads would do something creative with their hands for their children, but it was outside doing the building the billy carts and the tree houses.
Yeah.
Well, the kids are inside now on their electronic devices. So perhaps the modern equivalent is the dads to do something creative in the kitchen, and particularly I've got 2 teenage boys, so cooking is a great way to have a chat with them, and sometimes that's a challenge as a parent.
Yeah. Well, it's been a great conversation. I wish we could have gone for a bit longer, but maybe next time. Aside, I was trying to think. Well, thanks for joining us today, and yeah, I hope to have you back soon so we can have a bit of a longer, lengthier conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and good luck with all your work.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Cheers.